Story 1. Oh, I am winning this one. Ancestry.com. The direct message was along the lines of, "You are attractive. I do not think we are related." And we were confirmed to be distant cousins. Story 2. In the intensive care unit, wearing full personal protective equipment, gown, hair protection, shoe covers, mask, goggles, and gloves. This was in 2020, and I was there as an emergency medical technician to transport a patient who was very sick with COVID to another facility. He was a certified nursing assistant. He looked at the picture of my face on my name tag and said, "You aren't too bad. Are you single? What's your number?" I believe this is solid evidence that what you're wearing has nothing to do with anything. Story 3. My partner of 9 years took his own life, and a man from college attended the wake. Later, he apologized, admitting that his intention was to flirt and ask me out, which, in retrospect, was in bad taste. Story 4. At a bus stop before I got on, and then at another bus stop 5 miles away after I got off the bus. He did not get on the bus himself. He drove his car following the bus and waited for me to get off. Story 5. I was holding my sister's hair while she vomited into a bin in a mall parking lot when a guy approached and asked if I was single. Story 6. Definitely not the worst experience I've had, but I was once loudly asked how I felt about bathroom sex in the quiet study area of the library. A guy approached, planted his hands on my table, and loomed over me while asking this. There was a full room of about 24 people silently staring at him, but he only seemed to realize he should be embarrassed after I gave him a firm "no thank you" and returned to ignoring him. He called me a derogatory term and left in a huff. Story 7. A police officer pulled me over about a dozen times at the exact same spot, always giving me a warning. Finally, he asked me out one day. When I said no and told him he was rather unethical, he gave me a ticket. Story 8. I had a guy hit on me while I was vacuuming my car at an automatic car wash. He looked like a Latino version of Freddie Mercury, wearing a tank top and tight jeans. There was something attractive about him. As I finished up, he rolled up next to me, and while cleaning his car, he kept making eye contact. I chuckled to myself, thinking I was much older than he was and he seemed like a player. After a bit of mutual flirting, he leaned against the bumper of his car with his knee bent and asked, "Do you come here often?" I burst out laughing and replied, "Yes, when I feel dirty." He started cracking up, and then I realized how it sounded. I awkwardly corrected myself, saying, "I mean when my car is dirty. When it needs to be cleaned." He gotta go. Bye. Story 9. I worked at a crisis center. I was waiting for a victim of sexual assault to finish something. The police officer there to take the report asked me my age, as I looked underage at the time. When he found out I was of legal age, he made advances toward me. Story 10. Outside of a church, he was 17 and ended up calling me a slut because I didn't respond to his advances while holding a child's hand. Story 11. I'll go first. Driving at full speed on the highway, I was just minding my own business, enjoying a song, when a guy signaled for me to roll down my window and slow down. I thought something must be wrong with my car, so I complied. He then exclaimed, "You're so beautiful." I didn't respond. I just sped away. I was driving at 110 kilometers per hour, minding my own business. How did he expect that to end? Did he think I would stop on the side of the highway to give him my number? To all men, please don't do that. I wouldn't advise anyone to act that way, to be honest. Story 12. At the police precinct, the officer was taking my statement while I was filing a report about harassment and stalking. Story 13. Inpatient psychiatric ward. He became upset and pouty when I informed him that I was being released to go home to my husband. Story 14. Sam's Club. He took a chance by offering me a free piece of pizza and asking me out. I was buying a hot dog for my toddler, who happily ate both the pizza and the hot dog after I kindly informed the guy that I am happily married. I get approached every time I wear my husband's Mass Effect hoodie in public. Story 15. Group therapy. He was also one of those individuals who were convinced they could change my mind about being gay if I would give them just one night. Story 16. I was once admitted to the hospital overnight with a serious head injury. I woke up in the morning with no memory of the accident or the previous day. The doctor came into the room and gave me his number. Apparently, we had a conversation the night before, but I did not remember any of it. Story 17. In the middle of the street after flipping my bicycle, I was 13 years old and bleeding from a cut on my knee when a grown man decided it was the perfect time to ask me out. Story 18. Oh wow, this one is easy. The most ridiculous place a man hit on me was at a funeral. Yes, you read that right. I was just trying to pay my respects when this guy literally walked up to me, handed me a tissue, and said, "You're way too pretty to be this sad." I'm like, "Sir, are you seriously hitting on me at a funeral?" Needless to say, that didn't go anywhere. Story 19. At work in front of a patient. I was interrupted while speaking to the patient. Story 20. May I share a story about a woman approaching a man, specifically my father-in-law? At my mother-in-law's funeral, a woman slipped her phone number to him, saying, "Call me anytime." Story 21. I attended a meeting as an advocate for a young adult seeking disability services. I found it challenging to explain the situation. The young man, about 18 years old, had not achieved his goal of understanding how to identify scams. During the meeting, a representative from the state announced that the young man was unintelligent and would never learn. He left the room in tears. I stood up and confronted the representative before leaving. A few minutes later, the young man approached me in the parking lot and asked me out, perhaps because he appreciated my passion. I declined his offer. Story 22. I was intoxicated and using the men's urinal. I will buy you a drink after you wash your hands. Story 23. Exactly 7 days after my husband's death, a friend asked me to date him at the local convenience store. I consistently declined every time he asked, which was monthly. Story 24. Not a lady, but I was approached by a man in a clinic after some of the staff rushed out to administer Narcan. He also shared that his wife left him when she discovered he was gay, and he has custody of the children. It was very awkward. Story 25. I accidentally called the wrong number once. After we exchanged pleasantries and had a good laugh about my mistake, he said I had an attractive voice and started flirting with me. I could look like a ghoul for all he knew. I simply told him I was gay and blocked his number. Story 26. I worked at a cemetery, and during a funeral, one of the family members of the deceased made an advance toward me. I was like, "Sir, the casket hasn't even been lowered, and I'm trying to facilitate the service right now." Story 27. I'm not a woman, but my lifelong female friend lost her husband in a car crash. At the funeral, one of his friends tried to flirt with her. Story 28. I worked in a funeral home for 5 years and a library for 12. I was approached much more frequently at the funeral home than I ever was while working at the library. Story 29. In a portable toilet line at a music festival, the line was moving very slowly. The person behind me was so drunk and annoying that I almost got out of line. My boyfriend was in a food line and eventually saved me from the person. Story 30. I was approached and asked out by a therapist at the end of a session, as well as an emergency medical technician who recognized me from my Snapchat while I was being driven to the hospital. Story 31. I believe that individuals who approach women at funerals and other emotionally charged events often exhibit predatory behavior. Story 32. In the women's restroom of a bar, we let him in because he was with other girls, and we assumed that's where he felt most comfortable regarding sexuality or gender identity. However, he hit on me in our one safe space, and he didn't even use the bathroom. Story 33. Free clinic, domestic violence court, blood drive, in front of a deceased body. He was a police officer at the scene, and best of all, a fertility doctor's office. Story 34. A man at a Walmart was super poor and actively stealing food and necessities from the one down the road. A ginger guy was there one day and chatted with me for an hour while my pockets were full of my one meal for the day. Story 35. It wasn't as ridiculous as it was awkward. A guy asked me for my Snapchat at work while I was busy helping others. Story 36. I'm considering a bet on an abortion clinic. I don't know any stories like that, but I feel it could be the most ridiculous option, and I won't rule it out. Story 37. Not really a lady, but I was approached by a guy in my Twitter direct messages a day after we started talking. Fortunately, I blocked him. Story 38. I was approached by a man who was probably 60 years my senior while waiting in line for the bathroom on an international flight, just a few feet away from where his wife was sitting. Story 39. When I worked at a condominium management company as a receptionist, I was responsible for collecting monthly dues. One man approached me while I was messaging him about his unpaid dues for a couple of months. Later, he found my profile on my company's Instagram and messaged me there. I also had several men approach me while I was contacting them for repairs and maintenance at the same job. Story 40. At a lesbian bar while I was cuddling with my wife. At a preschool, I was the child, he was an adult. At a family gathering, we are related and I was a child, he was an adult. In a women's bathroom, a stranger walked in to ask me out while I was experiencing food poisoning, and he grew impatient waiting outside. At a women's only BDSM event while I was engaging with my wife, it is extremely against the rules to interrupt people. While I was teaching a math class to a group of children, he walked in off the street and attempted to chat me up. In a therapist's office waiting room, in the emergency room, I was covered in blood, trying to apply pressure to my hand to stop the bleeding. Story 41. I was riding my bike in the bike lane when a man slowed down his car, rolled down his windows, and started to flirt. Story 42. My dad and I were involved in a serious car accident during a snowstorm, which resulted in our car being totaled and my dad being taken to the hospital by ambulance. A bystander who witnessed the accident offered to drive me home. He got my number to check on my dad's condition but ended up using it to flirt with me. Story 43. On my way into the grocery store, a guy hanging around outside randomly said, "You have pretty feet." I quickly turned my head to look at him, which made me bump into the sliding doors of the store. At first, I was embarrassed, but then I couldn't help but laugh when I went inside. What was that all about? Story 44. So listen, it's not a literal physical place, but I have worked at least 3 jobs where the majority involve talking on the phone to other people. I can tell you right now, I have been hit on and asked out over the phone at least 20 times that I can remember. These guys have no clue what I look like. They must really like the way I sound over the phone. I even had a guy, who I believe was black, once say, "Hey, you said your name was Undersurf. That's a black girl name, so you must be black. And you sound like a pretty black girl too." I am black, but I've heard non-black women have the same name too, even though it's rare. That's not even the worst part. Story 45. I was walking my 100-pound Rottweiler when a small poodle Shih Tzu mix charged at us from across the street. The owner came running out, flailing around trying to grab his dog, which kept dodging him. I had my dog sit and kept him close to me, trying to put my body between my dog and this little fluff ball that was jumping up and trying to bite my dog's face. Just as it seemed he was about to finally grab his dog, he stopped and started hitting on me. I don't know if it was stress or an attempt to make himself feel less embarrassed about his dog attacking mine, but I was frustrated. I thought, "Grab your dog, man." He finally caught his dog, cradled it in his arms. The dog was not happy about this and was still barking, and acted like it was completely normal. I avoid that street now. Story 46. In the lineup to vote in the Canadian federal election, a random guy walked up behind me and said, "You must be married already, eh?" Story 47. I was homeless and in the heat, literally hauling everything I owned when a guy drove alongside me and tried to hit on me. I was extremely frustrated with him. Story 48. At a funeral, I didn't think much of it at the time since I was still in shock, but I now feel it was very inappropriate. Story 49. I got asked out once while working in a deli covered in chicken juice and meat shavings. I looked my worst and smelled my worst, but this guy was determined to get my number. Story 50. The cheese aisle at a grocery store at 10 p.m. A man approached me and said, "I think we matched on Tinder." I replied, "I don't use Tinder." He looked very confused and said, "Oh, I guess it must have been someone else." I responded with yup and walked away. After I checked out and was walking to my car, I saw him sitting in his car in the parking lot. He stared at me while I unloaded my groceries and got into my car. He didn't follow me, thankfully. I don't know how he thought the comment would play out. Did he expect me to respond, "Wow, we did match. My place or yours? What a mistake." Story 51. It wasn't really the place, but I was playing outside with my 2-year-old and was clearly pregnant. Story 52. I worked in a daycare in my early 20s. I was regularly approached by one of the married fathers when he would drop off or pick up his toddler son. He was a sleazy man, a real pushy used car salesman type. The manager refused to address the situation because he was on the board of the school that owned the daycare. His wife was aware of his behavior and would sometimes apologize to me on his behalf when she came to pick up their son without him. I got the impression that I was not the only young woman she had noticed him trying to flirt with. There was no light in her eyes when she talked to me. She looked completely exhausted and emotionally checked out. I felt awful for her. I hope she left him in the end. Story 53. I fell down a flight of stairs and had 2 nails go through my shins, one on each side. The registered nurse at the emergency department, who spent a lot of time cleaning the 9-inch cut, asked me out when it was all over. Story 54. At the grocery store in Seattle, that wasn't unusual. I said yes, and he showed up on rollerblades. I couldn't go along with it after that. I'm not that adventurous. Story 55. At a gas station, I had a flat tire and my phone died. I asked to use the phone to call for roadside assistance, and the gas station worker asked if I wanted to hang out since I had some free time. Story 56. In the pharmacy counseling room, while I was giving them their flu shot, a guy said, "You have beautiful skin," then proceeded to comment on how big my engagement ring was. He asked me to go for coffee after my shift. Story 57. I was filling my car at a small, off-the-beaten-path gas station. The man working there told me I had eyes like window cleaner. He was at least 50 years older than me. I was 17. Story 58. Pet funeral home. My childhood German Shepherd died unexpectedly on my birthday, so we brought her to be cremated. While I was sobbing, the director asked me if I wanted to get dinner after he was finished. I was 25 and he was about 55. Story 59. On a Transperth train, I was about 25 and this kid was 12. He asked for my number, and I said, "Why? Do you need a babysitter?" Story 60. Microsoft Teams on a military deployment. A person I had never met saw my name on my uniform, looked me up on Teams using a government computer, and messaged me. Story 61. I was driving down the road, minding my own business, and could see in the oncoming traffic a car driving erratically. I thought, this isn't going to end well. Immediately after that thought, I was hit head-on by that car. The entire front of my car was smashed in. The other car was driven by a young man in his 20s, who was clearly distracted and not paying attention because he was on his phone. I was really upset that my car was considered totaled. I wasn't ready to let it go. It was my first car that I bought for myself, and I loved it. I was sobbing. We pulled over and exchanged information. This guy could clearly see I was a good 10 years older than him according to my driver's license. What does he do in a situation like that? He asked me out for a drink. He totaled my car and thought it was appropriate to ask me out. It boggled my mind how absolutely clueless he was. First, he couldn't drive properly, and second, he asked a total stranger out after wrecking their car. What was he thinking? Story 62. A producer of the show Missing Persons approached me while I was filming for it because my fiancée was missing. My fiancée went missing, and after a week of not hearing anything and receiving little help from the police, they called and asked if I was willing to film for the show. They said it would mean I would have 2 dedicated police contacts working on finding him instead of having random officers who might not prioritize the case, so I agreed. They came to film at my home, recorded me watching home videos of him, asked me to look through his belongings, and pleaded with the camera for him to come home. They essentially did everything they could to break me to the point where I was hysterically crying and couldn't string a sentence together. I was already an emotional wreck from having my partner disappear for the past week, and after a few hours of filming, I was completely drained. As soon as the cameras stopped and everyone was leaving, the producer gave me his card in case I needed to talk. He sent texts asking to meet up under the pretense of discussing my missing partner. And when I agreed to meet, it was just him without police or cameras. He kept suggesting we go to his car to talk more privately. It was incredibly disturbing to know this person worked with the police, filming people during such a vulnerable time and using it to his advantage. Story 63. A client in my office, a criminal defense paralegal, was reminded about his court date later that week regarding his assault on a female. Story 64. I got pulled over one evening. The conversation went something like this. Hi, do you know why I pulled you over? No. Your tail light is out. Oh, it is? I guess I better get that fixed. Where are you coming from? We just had dinner at a local restaurant. The officer peers into the car with a flashlight. Who's with you? My parents. They wave from the back seat. And my boyfriend. He nods in the passenger seat. Did you have anything to drink at dinner? No, that's why I'm driving. What do you think of the local restaurant? Consistent. The food never lets you down. How about we go there sometime? Sure, why not? Sounds like fun. My parents start laughing, and there is smoke coming from my boyfriend's ears. Okay. Go on home and get your tail light fixed. The officer waves us on. My partner was fuming mad. But what are you gonna do? Story 65. On the sidewalk from his car while I was taking a walk in my third trimester of pregnancy, I was still trying to figure out if he was interested in my pregnancy or just thought I had a pot belly. Story 66. I have a whole photo album of creepy messages I received while having a femme-presenting avatar on Words with Friends, a Scrabble app. Story 67. In an emergency room, while I'm trying to decompress his penis by pulling blood out of it, I spent 10 hours on this task. Story 68. I used to do nude modeling for life drawing classes. There was a man who kept asking me out after the class ended. I eventually quit modeling altogether because I was afraid he would show up at the classes, as the life drawing community was quite small. He ruined that experience for me. Story 69. I took some students on a field trip, and another teacher sat with me at lunch and started flirting with me and inviting me to his house. He was in his 50s and I was 25 at the time. Story 70. It felt ridiculous at the time. We were both in line at the pharmacy waiting for prescriptions. I was feverish and felt terrible, with dirty hair and worn-out clothes. He was a bit sharper but didn't feel good either. The line was moving slowly, and we ended up having a long conversation. By the time we got our medications, he had my number and we dated afterward, but not for long. Story 71. I work at a funeral home. A man asked for my phone number and a date while crying at his grandfather's funeral. Story 72. I was on a mototaxi when a guy in a Jeep signaled my driver to stop. We stopped, thinking it might be the police or something. You are so beautiful. Can I have your number to get to know each other better? I was still wondering where he saw all that beauty since I was fully dressed, wearing a helmet, and it was getting pretty dark outside. Story 73. He was leaning on a wooden post in an awkward stance right near me, looking the other way to seem casual. When my boyfriend came back, he ran away so quickly that he fell. I guess it was because my boyfriend was a big, muscular guy. Story 74. I was sitting next to my boyfriend, chatting, when he went to get more drinks. The guy next to me tried to force a kiss and push his tongue down my throat. When I didn't reciprocate, he told my boyfriend that I had hit on him. Why are some guys so entitled? Story 75. In the hospital emergency room, I was a patient and he was the security guard. I wasn't feeling well. This was all rather ridiculous. Story 76. I stopped at a red light, crying because my dad had just died. A driver next to me tried to get my attention. Story 77. At a bus stop, he asked me what kind of lingerie I wore to bed in front of 3 other people. Story 78. One time, I was putting out laundry in my ground floor apartment courtyard. 2 apartments over, a guy my age suddenly appeared over the wall. He watched the windows for a minute and then started climbing into that courtyard sneakily. I called out, You all right, mate? Because I was pretty sure I was witnessing a break-in. He looked over and said, Oh, nah, all good. I'm just visiting someone. Though, what are you doing? I held up a shirt. Laundry. He replied, No, like, what are you doing tonight? Different shirt and less of a smile. Laundry. Story 79. I will mention the two most notable times. First, at a funeral while his girlfriend, who is my friend, was mourning the loss of her grandmother. Second, literally in front of my best friend, who is the man's ex. He insisted she tell me what a good man he was. I laughed in his face. Story 80. This past week, a coworker made me uncomfortable during small talk. He is the new server, and it was only his second day. At one point, he replied, It's better when you do it. We were only discussing work, and this was our first meeting. His suggestive tone of voice prompted me to shut the conversation down immediately. Story 81. In the middle of a run at dusk, I was on my last lap without a torch. He stopped me mid-run, earphones in, blinding me with his headlamp. Come on, you can't expect me to be relaxed. Story 82. At work, where I have no way to escape as a cashier, I feel overwhelmed immediately after mentioning their spouse and family. Story 83. When I was an employment counselor for individuals on social assistance, a man I was helping asked me out on a date. He was in his 60s and I was 28 at the time, definitely not my type. Individuals on social assistance in my province were receiving only $190 a month, along with some help for rent. Again, it was just not my type. Story 84. I was at a police station after someone reported me for physical injury. The officer seemed to have an unusual interest. Story 85. So many places. The worst was probably at a conference after a talk when I was clearly pregnant. If he thought I was just fat, I had just cut questions short because I needed to go to the restroom and express that the baby was on my bladder. My wedding ring is literally tattooed onto my finger. They invited me to go have drinks. To this day, I hope he hadn't left my talk thinking I was bloated and unfaithful instead of recognizing that I was a pregnant woman concerned about my baby's health. Story 86. I was approached by a man while buying pastries. It wasn't even at a restaurant, just a small bakery. Story 87. I had a girl lose her temper and say I was trying to hit on her at my girlfriend's birthday party at my girlfriend's house. What I was actually trying to do was get a girl who used to be a friend to leave and not date the guy she was with because every person he associated with was a hardcore drug addict, and he turned every girl he dated into a hardcore drug addict. Surprisingly, she became a hardcore drug addict. Story 88. I used to date a nurse who worked in a clinic. A man who was being examined for sexually transmitted infections turned to her, while he was quite vulnerable, and asked if she wanted to go for a drink. She did not go for that drink. Story 89. A medical student at a doctor's appointment was probably the most outrageous, but the worst was a family friend at my dad's funeral. The man was an adult when I started walking and was invited to my wedding. Yes, he knew I was married too. Story 90. At my job in the intensive care unit, he tried to set me up with his son while his wife was dying in the hospital bed right in front of us. Grief does strange things, I guess. Story 91. One time, I was returning home from a school for my teaching placement. That day, I was coming home by bus and had to walk over a bridge above the motorway when a man leaned out of his car window and continuously catcalled me. I felt very uncomfortable and had to walk home quickly that day. Story 92. I'm the husband, but one time a taxi driver drove us to the airport for a vacation. While I was getting our bags situated, he took the chance to ask my wife out. We have an open marriage, so it's not frowned upon in our case. We had a good laugh about it. Story 93. This is how single I am. I thought the question meant to ask about the ridiculous place in a woman's body where a man has physically hit her. Story 94. A guy asked if I would move in with him at Quick Trip while I was talking to my husband and picking out chocolate milk. There is a good chance we were even holding hands, as we always do. Story 95. At the bins at a metal show, I went to throw away my empty cup when he leaned against the bins. Hey! No. Story 96. I had terrible sciatica and a twisted hip for about 6 months and still walked to my chiropractor's office. This guy saw me crossing the street while I was in visible pain and still decided to walk along with me, asking me out. I couldn't believe it. He just didn't read my face. He left me his business card. Story 97. I have a few amusing experiences to share. I consider myself decent looking and very friendly, which I think can sometimes be a problem. I enjoy small talk. Here are some of the best moments. At my obstetrician's office when I was early in my pregnancy, I overheard a woman do soon. She didn't hear at first, but I made sure she did. At my oncology appointment, there was a medical sales representative who was quite unsettling. At my husband's pinning ceremony, I initially thought it was a joke, but it was serious. At the after-party of my ex's funeral, his half-brother was mortified when he realized who I was. It was hilarious in hindsight, and I still tease him about it. They weren't close and barely knew each other, but at least they had the same taste in women. The police officer who didn't give me a ticket when I was 16. He gave me his number and he was at least in his 30s. Story 98. I worked in a nursing home fresh out of high school for a year, and there were many widows there, both men and women. It was quite intense. I wondered how someone could even think to behave that way. I witnessed the nurses bathe and clean residents after they had accidents, and I was the one cleaning the beds. I don't understand how he could have thought that was acceptable. Story 99. I'm not sure if it counts, but my uncle by marriage told me I could do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on him anytime when I mentioned I was a first aid officer at my workplace during small talk at my father's funeral wake. I told him I would rather let him die. Story 100. A Global Disability Summit. I was working as an aide for my boss when someone commented that they found my toe shoes or barefoot shoes attractive. The situation felt more complex since the man did not have feet. Story 101. When I was 16, I left school and went to college. An old teacher from my school reached out to me, saying he lived near my college. I still don't know how he knew which college I attended, but he mentioned the town. He suggested we meet for coffee or something stronger. This man had retired from my school when I was 14. It wasn't the weirdest situation, but it was definitely inappropriate. Story 102. I was pushing my grandmother in her wheelchair when someone hit on me. The person completely ignored her, as if she didn't even exist. While this is a noteworthy situation, I found it terribly inconsiderate, and I quickly declined. Story 103. While taking money from an ATM, I noticed that the machine was in front of a pillar in the middle of a subway station, surrounded by open space. I was focused on entering my PIN and reading the instructions, as it was not my native language. Suddenly, I felt a presence standing too close behind me, far too close for someone simply waiting in line. When I glanced back, he smiled and said hello, attempting to flirt. He even acted surprised when I pointed out that it was inappropriate to chat up someone who was taking out money, as if I was the odd one. Story 104. I was working as a nurse for the public ambulance service when I received a call for an unconscious male. Upon arrival, I found that the person had already been dead for a few hours, and his friend was trying to flirt with me and asking me out. We were right next to the deathbed and the corpse. It grossed me out terribly, and I couldn't wait to leave that place. Story 105. My medical oncologist made inappropriate advances towards me during my visits. I have stage 3 ovarian cancer, and after I dismissed his flirting, I brought my boyfriend to the next appointment. He became angry and took me to his office under the pretense of reviewing my records. I haven't returned since. Story 106. The gym, while I was running on the treadmill, he walked up and started flirting with me. Story 107. While crossing the road, he walked past me and held my arm, saying I caught his eye. I simply replied, "You're going to catch a car soon too," and kept walking. Story 108. I was in the back seat of a car, throwing up from a severe case of food poisoning. Then a friend who had a crush on me started talking about liking me and going out. Story 109. A hospital waiting room. I was 16 and went with my mother to take my father to the emergency room. She asked me to grab a coffee for her while she talked to the doctors. I was at the coffee machine, It was 2 a.m., and a man approached and leaned on the machine, saying, "Heaven sent an angel here," and tried to flirt. It was strange. Story 110. I was browsing almond milks in the refrigerator at a grocery store, taking the time to read the label on one, when I suddenly heard, "You're so beautiful." I looked around, thinking I was imagining things because there was nobody near me. Then I saw eyes looking at me from inside the fridge, and I immediately put my milk down and left. Story 111. On the sidewalk, which may seem ordinary, becomes ridiculous given that it was a block down the street from the middle school where my friend and I were walking home. Story 112. While applying for food assistance during a difficult time in my life, the person processing my application made advances toward me. Story 113. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as flirting, but a man drove up to me while I was walking down the street and asked, "Hey, do you need a ride? I work for DoorDash." He seemed to think that was a reassuring way to convince me to accept. I replied, "Doesn't DoorDash pick up food, not people?" "No thanks." He sped off quickly. Story 114. Both times I worked as a cashier, the weirdest experience was while working at a gas station. Someone asked, "What time are you getting off work?" I replied, "Not for a long time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye."